Welcome to this week's episode of my YouTube channel. We are talking today about safety in exercise during pregnancy. Why? Because I keep getting all of these questions on my Instagram about what's safe during pregnancy, what should I worry about? I'm pregnant now and I don't know how to change my training routine, or what should I worry about in terms of my core work, or a whole bunch of stuff. So basically I wanted to jump on and do maybe a mini series about exercise in pregnancy, because there is so much contradictory information on Google, and heaps of women that I see say they fall into that downward tunnel of Google searching where things just become really, really overwhelming and they have no idea what to do. So first of all, I want to touch on the ethical nature of research around exercise during pregnancy. So a lot of, I guess, exercise prescription that we give out as exercise physiologists, or that I do, comes from evidence-based research. So that means they've done studies on it. This is what the studies have said about the results, and this is why we implement it. Now, if you are pregnant and you're growing a mini human, there's a little bit of an ethical problem around putting you in a dangerous or potentially unsafe situation where you're measuring things and seeing what the effect is on you and your fetus. So this is why there is a bit of limited information around, or research around, particular maybe intensities with exercise, because it's pretty much deemed a little bit unethical in terms of the safety for both the mother and the fetus. So a lot of research has been done on animals and then been extrapolated into human, I guess, theories. So a lot of the research is basically around moderate intensity exercise for the purpose of eliminating risks for mum and bub in a human. So what do we know about a growing fetus in terms of what it needs in order to be safe and growing? A fetus needs oxygen supply. It needs nutrient delivery through blood flow. It also needs to be maintaining a pretty good warm environment that's not too hot. And it also needs the ability to excrete or get rid of waste products through the blood flow as well. So we're talking about like byproducts or waste products. Let's just talk about waste products. Now, exercise itself places a pretty high demand on all of those factors, as well as a mother's system to do the exercise. So when we think about exercise demand for a mum, or even just a general person, there is increased demand for oxygen to be delivered to working muscles in order to keep your body moving. There is an increased blood supply to those working muscles. There is increased substrate for fuels for energy. So for example, glucose is used for energy when doing high intensity exercise or high amounts of exercise. I mean, fat can also be used, but let's not get into that. So we also have an excessive amount of byproducts from working muscles. So when muscles do their thing and contract, there's a byproduct that comes out of that. One of those would be lactic acid, which you feel during high intensity exercise, which gets shuttled into the blood and then excreted out of your body. And also heat becomes one of those byproducts as well. So not only does the mother have to be able to meet the demands of the exercise itself, but she also has to be able to maintain the environment, or those same factors being delivered to the fetus, in order to keep that fetus safe. So this is where we look at why intensity or some forms of exercise may actually put those particular measures at risk. Now, despite this demand, exercise is actually deemed very safe for the mother and the fetus, pretty much at most intensities. However, there are some concerns around the safety, and we're going to talk about the most important two that I consider things that we can control as humans or mothers or pregnant women exercising. So first of all, we're going to talk about intensity. Why is there so much advice around avoiding high intensity exercise? We're going to talk about distribution of blood flow. Our blood is designed to flow around our body and go towards areas of the body or organs that require blood flow or oxygen or nutrients at specific times in terms of its demand at that time. So if you are sitting down, for example, and you're not using muscles around your legs, you will not require very much blood flow to that area. However, if you're using your brain quite a lot, or you're using more of like your central digestive organs, your body will distribute your blood flow to that area for the procedures or activities to take place and for those organs to work efficiently. So if you go through exercise, for example, you start to use your muscles more and you require more delivery of oxygen, more delivery of nutrients and fuel, and therefore your blood gets distributed to that area and away from other areas that it no longer requires as much blood flow. So in the event of higher intensity exercise, where you're working lots of muscle fiber and your demand for oxygen delivery, fuel delivery, blood flow, for example, heightens, it's going to redistribute that blood flow from other areas that no longer require it and push it towards the working muscles. So there is speculation around redistributing that blood flow from the uterus into the working muscles and then putting you at risk of reduced blood flow to that uterus. Now, higher intensity exercise also requires higher sources of fuel to give you energy in order to actually perform the task. And we call this glucose, a form of carbohydrate, especially at high intensities. Now, this is something that is also part of like that system of nutrient delivery to the growing fetus. So if you are now requiring all this excessive glucose, you may potentially be taking it away from the growing baby or growing fetus and using it for exercise. So in that event also, you're using lots of muscles. One of those byproducts is heat. You are now generating a lot of heat within your body. So we not only have possibly reduced blood flow to the uterus, we've possibly reduced the amount of glucose or fuel that's going to the uterus to supply it with some sort of energy for it to grow. We've also increased our core temperature. So all those three things are things that we need to be a little bit mindful of, because the baby actually, or growing fetus, requires those three things to maintain its healthy state. So what is high intensity in that case? Now, high intensity exercise is basically prescribed as a percentage of your heart rate max, which is a formula that we use to basically estimate what your heart's highest ability to function is and how many beats per minute that would be at your maximal exertion of energy. This is like it's 100% going as fast as you possibly can. That's how we prescribe exercise, as a percentage of your heart rate max, or one of the ways we can do that. Now, in terms of high intensity, this is roughly somewhere above 75% high intensity back up into vigorous intensity. So if you want to work that out, that you can. However, in terms of pregnancy, heart rate prescription is actually not as reliable, because our heart rate has changed based on physiological changes that happen during pregnancy. So we actually talk about this as a measure of RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion. Now, the normal scale for this is a scale of 6 to 20, and it's basically replicating a possible heart rate range. However, 6 to 20 seems ridiculous in terms of trying to actually pick a number between that. I know when I first learned that, I was like, how do I choose a number between 6 to 20 on giving you an idea about how I feel? So if we look at this on a 1 to 10 scale, it's going to roughly be around that 4 or 5 out of 10. That is a moderate intensity. This is somewhat hard. That's how we describe that. Now, in my opinion, when I actually ask my clients, how do you feel on a scale of 1 to 10 of what I think is a moderate level of exercise, I definitely get a very varied answer based on those individuals. So some people will rate moderate at 4, and some people will rate moderate at 7. However, 7 on the 1 to 10 scale is actually more higher intensity, or closer to vigorous intensity, in a sense of like actual science. So I actually talk to a lot of my clients about using the talk test in terms of measuring that moderate intensity. You want to be able to talk, but you shouldn't be able to sing. That is a moderate intensity prescription in terms of exercise and understanding what it feels like. So I would say to you, if you feel like you are actually putting in a little bit of effort for that activity, but it's not uncomfortable, this would be a moderate based exercise or intensity of exercise for you to do during pregnancy. Now, what about temperature? Temperature is the other safety concern that I'm usually trying to advise women on monitoring when they're exercising. So basically, a higher core temperature or increasing the core temperature or the temperature of your uterus is putting you at risk of complications during pregnancy. So this is why we want to keep a nice, maintained, stable temperature. Our bodies go through this process of what we call homeostasis, and it's basically our body keeping us at a stable environment in order for us to function. Now, our bodies do a really good job at maintaining that on most occasions. So, for example, in the event of some sort of exercise where your temperature is increasing, our body will do things that help us to maintain its general working temperature. And that could be something like sweating. We're offsetting excessive heat and keeping our core temperature the same. However, these homeostatic systems aren't always as quick and efficient as they could be in order to keep us at these levels under other circumstances. So when we're doing things like excessive endurance exercise, or we're exercising in environments that are high temperatures where we have no control over external temperatures. So we're thinking like saunas or yoga or extreme weather conditions or humidity, things where we're going to feel that excessive heat on us as well, which is going to increase our core temperature and make it a little bit harder for our body to maintain that. It will rise up a couple of degrees, not very much, because our bodies don't really change too much in the normal scenarios. However, they can. So when you are exercising, it is really important that you maintain or keep your core temperature from rising so high. So a lot of women get a little bit nervous about this because feeling hot is pretty normal when you're exercising. And if you are actually increasing your exercise intensity, you're probably going to increase what feels like you're increasing your core temperature a little bit. So I talk to women about this all the time. You are able to get sweaty. You can feel a little bit warm, but you don't want to feel overheated. You don't want to exercise in a jumper if you're already feeling hot. You want to be able to exercise in a cool environment that's maintaining temperature, or you've got access to airflow. You're not ridiculously hot outside in the middle of summer, in the middle of the day, trying to go for a run for a whole hour. Those types of things are what's going to increase that core temperature. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So keep your temperature nice and low, or just monitor it. Keep it normal, like a normal, warm, I'm getting sweaty, but I feel okay type temperature. This is what we want to maintain during exercise. What are the guidelines around exercise? What if you haven't actually trained before? What if you are training? Or what if you're an elite level athlete and you're basically like, what do I do now? Like, where can I go? What's moderate intensity for me? Well, great point to ask. This is where we're going to talk about what to do in terms of where you're already at. Now, if you are previously sedentary, which means you haven't done any exercise and all of a sudden you fall pregnant and you really want to start getting the benefits of exercise, the key is to just start small. So I recommend about 15 minutes 3 times a week. You're going to start with that, do a pretty good cool warm up and cool down. So that might be 5 minutes on either side, making it a little bit longer. And you're at that moderate paced intensity. So you're noticing it's a little bit of an effort. It's not uncomfortable. Or you can talk whilst you're doing the exercise. That's the type of starting point we're looking at if you're sedentary. You're going to aim, or your goal is to increase that to 30 minutes for maybe 4 days a week at the same moderate intensity. You can do that. Now, if you're already active and you're fairly active, you can pretty much maintain what you're doing and keeping in mind those rules around intensity, or not rules, but guidelines around intensity. So if you're constantly doing a lot of high intensity activity and it's hardcore, I'd probably think about dropping down that intensity. I mean, for one, you're probably not going to feel like you can maintain that during pregnancy anyway, because your body definitely struggles a lot more during that time than it normally does, but it is pretty safe for you to keep doing that. And you're probably going to have to taper off or modify this as you progress through your pregnancy, especially towards that 3rd trimester. Now, if you are an elite level athlete, or you're a very hardcore exerciser and you're already above the average levels of people exercising, or the recommended guidelines for general exercise and activity, this is a little bit more complicated in terms of like, what should you do? Initially, you can maintain that exercise regime or that training protocol. However, it is definitely advised to get some advice from a health professional who can guide you on how to modify this, especially intensity or the type of activity and exercise you might be doing or training, because there are also safety concerns around particular types of exercise. However, if you're already doing things, it's generally pretty safe because your body's quite conditioned to that type of exercise already. Now, in terms of the types of activity that we want to be doing during pregnancy or avoiding or thinking about in terms of our safety, we really want to think about, will I be at risk of some sort of impact or contact around my belly or body? If that's, collision, boxing or impact, or possibly risk of falls even, where you could fall off a push bike that you're riding, maybe not a stationary one, it's probably a bit safer. However, those types of impact or high risk of falls are a little bit more risky, and we want to avoid those. Things where we're getting ridiculous or drastic changes in pressure, so things like scuba diving or skydiving, are not advised, unfortunately, during pregnancy. Not that I think you'd probably want to, but definitely those types of pressure-based things are also risky. The other thing that is commonly talked about is heavy lifting. So heavy lifting is also something that we need to consider in terms of safety during pregnancy. However, this is very much a topic on its own, and I'm going to do another video next week about the safety around lifting during pregnancy. And we're talking about if you're a weights training type person, and the effect it has on your core and pelvic floor and intra-abdominal pressure. So next week, we're going to talk about that. However, this week, I hope this information has been a little bit more helpful for you in terms of like safety and exercise during pregnancy. And if you like this, please comment below, like the video, share, subscribe, because it's really going to help me in order to reach out to more women and give them more help and advice around what's safe for them during all aspects of their female life cycle, and teach women about how their bodies are working. So stay tuned for next week's video. Don't forget, like, subscribe, share, all the above, and check me out on my socials. Instagram is probably where I'm at. Otherwise, see you next week. Bye.